I want a divorce. The words landed in the middle of my kitchen like a brick through a window. No lead up. No warning. No we need to talk. Just the sentence. Flat and final. From the man who'd slept beside me for 12 years. Mark stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. His work shirt sleeves rolled up. His tie hanging crooked. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He looked done. I set my coffee mug on the counter. It clipped the edge of the granite and made a sharp ping that felt louder than it should have. You're joking, I said. I'm not. He moved further into the room. But he didn't come close. He stopped near the fridge. Like he was a guest in his own home. I've been unhappy for a long time. I met someone. I want to start over. A long beat of silence. I could feel the air in the room get heavier. Like the oxygen had been replaced with something thick and useless. Who is she? I asked. My voice steady. I was proud of that. I was proud of a lot of things in that moment. Most of which I'd lose by the end of the day. It doesn't matter. He said it like he was ending the subject. But I could see the way his eyes flickered. Like he wanted to say more. Like he needed to. It matters to me, I said. Finally turning to face him. It matters that you cheated on me. It matters that you're throwing away everything we built. It matters that you're doing it with some woman you can't even name for me. Her name is Jessica, he said, the words spilling out like they'd been waiting. She works at the downtown branch. Marketing. She's divorced. No kids. She gets it. Gets it. The phrase made me want to laugh. But I didn't. I just nodded. Like I was absorbing the information. Like it was a line item in a contract. I'm not here to rehash the affair, he said, his tone shifting, becoming more businesslike. I'm here to lay out the terms. I want the house. I want the car. The boat. The investment accounts. Half the college fund. Everything. I stared at him. I'd known it was coming. Of course. I'd sensed it for weeks. The late nights at the office. The subtle distancing. The way he checked his phone like it was a vault. But hearing it spoken aloud. Laid out like a grocery list. Made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. And Tyler? I asked. My voice didn't shake. I counted that as a victory. Mark looked relieved. Like he'd been waiting for me to ask. He stays with me. Full custody. You can have visitation. Weekends. Holidays. Summer. But he needs stability. I can give him that. You'd have to go back to work. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying it makes sense for him to stay in the home he knows. I felt the blood drain from my face. But I didn't let it show. I was good at that. I was good at being the calm one. The reasonable one. The one who never made a scene. You're serious, I said. Deadly. I sat down at the table. I could feel the wood grain under my palms. Rough and familiar. I used to sit here and help Tyler with his math homework. I used to sit here and drink wine with Mark and plan our next vacation. Now I was sitting here and listening to him divide our life into assets and liabilities. What about alimony? I asked. Because I had to ask. Because I was supposed to. I'll cover Tyler's expenses, he said. Like that was a favor. But beyond that. No. You're a grown woman. Amelia. You can support yourself. I wanted to throw something. A plate. A glass. The coffee mug I'd set down earlier. But I didn't. I just sat there. My hands folded in my lap. And let him talk. I'm not trying to punish you, he said, his voice softening. It was the first time he'd shown anything like remorse. And it made me hate him a little more. I'm trying to do what's best for everyone. For Tyler. For me. For you. For Jessica. I added. He winced. Fine. For all of us. The back door opened then. And Tyler walked in. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder and a sticky lollipop in his mouth. He stopped when he saw us. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice cheerful. Hey, Dad, what's for lunch? Mark looked at me, panic flashing across his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but I beat him to it. Grilled cheese, I said, smiling at Tyler. Coming right up. Tyler disappeared into the living room. And Mark exhaled like he'd just survived a hostage negotiation. This is killing him, he said quietly. seeing us like this. Then maybe you shouldn't have come here today. I replied, my smile fading. Maybe you should have handled this like an adult. He ignored me. Look, Amelia, I know this is a lot, but I need you to think about Tyler. Think about what's best for him. If we fight this, if we drag it through court, it'll destroy him. He'll blame himself. He'll think he's the reason we broke up. I laughed then. A short, bitter sound that made Mark flinch. You think I don't know that? I asked. You think I haven't spent the last month lying awake, wondering how I'm going to explain this to him? Wondering how I'm going to survive it? But you know what? I'm not going to let you bully me into signing away my life. I'm not going to let you take everything and walk away like you didn't destroy our family. Mark's jaw tightened. He'd expected tears. He'd expected begging. He had an expected fight. I'm not bullying you, he said. I'm offering you a solution. Take it or leave it. Fine, I said. I'll take it. He blinked. Excuse me, I said I'll take it. I repeated. I'll sign whatever you want. House, car, boat, investments, college fund, everything. Just give me visitation with Tyler. Mark stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Are you insane? He asked. No, I said. I'm tired. That shut him up. Because it was true. I was tired of fighting. Tired of pretending. Tired of being the bigger person while he stomped all over our marriage. Susan will draw up the papers, he said finally. We'll meet tomorrow. No, I said. I'll bring them to you. I stood up and walked to the sink. I ran water over my hands. Even though they weren't dirty, I needed something to do. Something to focus on besides the way my world was imploding. Amelia. Mark started, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said. Just go. Please. He hesitated. Like he wanted to say something else. Like he wanted to apologize. Like he wanted to take it all back. But he didn't. He just grabbed his keys off the counter and walked out the front door. I waited until I heard the garage door close before I sank to the floor. My knees buckled. And I let them. I wrapped my arms around myself and rocked back and forth. Even though no one could see me. Even though Tyler was in the next room, eating his grilled cheese like nothing had happened. Susan called 30 minutes later. Are you okay? She asked without preamble. Define okay. I replied. You sound like hell. Because I am hell. I said. Mark wants everything. House, car, boat, investments, college fund. Tyler stays with him. I get visitation. Susan was silent for a beat. Jesus Christ. Amelia. Why would you agree to that? Because it's easier. I said. Because fighting him means dragging Tyler through hell for the next 2 years. Because watching him lose everything will be punishment enough. He's not going to lose everything. Susan countered. Not if you sign away your rights. He's hiding assets. Amelia. I've told you that for months. His business accounts don't add up. He's been squirreling away money for God knows what. I don't care. I said. Just give me what I want, time with my son. Susan sighed. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said. But it's my mistake to make. We ended the call. And I went to check on Tyler. He was curled up on the couch, watching cartoons with a blanket pulled up to his chin. He looked so small, so safe, so oblivious. I sat down beside him and put my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me without hesitation. Mom? He asked. Yeah. Baby, are you and Dad getting a divorce? I closed my eyes. I'd known this question was coming. I'd been dreading it since the moment Mark walked out the door. Yes, I said. But it's not your fault. I know, he said. Like he'd already accepted it. Like he'd already decided it was okay. Can we still have pizza night, every Friday? I promised. Always. He smiled then. And my heart broke a little. Because he was going to be okay. Somehow. Some way. He was going to be okay. And that was all that mattered. I stayed there with him until he fell asleep. And then I went back to the kitchen and started packing. Not because I was leaving. Yet. But because I needed to be ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready for the quiet war I was about to wage. ready for the moment when Mark realized he hadn't won at all. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Tyler was still asleep, his blonde hair sticking up in every direction like he'd been wrestling with the pillows. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched him breathe, counting the rise and fall of his chest like it was a lifeline. I had exactly 7 hours before Susan's office opened, and I intended to use every minute of it. The first thing I did was log into our joint bank account. Mark had always managed the finances, another point of pride for him, another way to keep me dependent. But I'd learned the basics over the years, mostly from nagging him to explain the difference between a 401k and a Roth IRA. I knew how to find the statements, how to download the PDFs, how to look for the numbers that didn't add up. I printed the last 6 months of activity and spread them out on the dining room table. The first thing I noticed was the ATM withdrawals. 3, 4, sometimes 5 a week. Always in $100 increments. Always at gas stations and convenience stores far from his office. Mark didn't buy gas. He leased a car. He didn't snack. He ate lunch with clients. These were ghost transactions. And they were adding up fast. The second thing I noticed was the wire transfers. 2 of them. Both to an account at a credit union in Indiana. Both for amounts just under $10,000. The first was labeled consulting fee. The second was equipment rental. Neither made sense. Mark's consulting business was a one-man operation with no employees and no equipment. The fees were going somewhere, and I intended to find out where. I took pictures of the statements with my phone and sent them to Susan. No explanation, no context, just the raw data. She'd know what to do with it. The second thing I did was call my sister, Claire. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp with sleep. It's 4:30 in the morning. Amelia. What the hell do you want? I need a favor. I said, keeping my voice low so I didn't wake Tyler. Something that can't be traced back to me. Claire was quiet for a beat. Then she said, tell me everything. I did. I told her about Mark's sudden desire for a divorce, about his demand for everything we owned, about the hidden bank activity I'd just discovered. I told her about the woman named Jessica, about the way Mark had tried to frame the whole thing as a noble act of self-preservation. His screwing you. Claire said when I finished. It wasn't a question. In more ways than one. I agreed. What do you want me to do? I want you to find out everything you can about Jessica. I said. Where she lives. Where she works. Who her friends are. I want to know if she's as perfect as Mark thinks she is. You think she's got secrets too? Claire said. And I could hear the smile in her voice. Everyone's got secrets. I replied. Some are just better hidden than others. Consider it done. Claire said. Anything else? Yeah. I said. I need you to keep an eye on Tyler. Just for a few days. Make sure he's okay. Make sure he's not blaming himself. He's a smart kid. Amelia. Claire said. He'll be fine. But I'll watch him anyway. We hung up. And I went back to the dining room table. The statements were still spread out in front of me, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's office. His assistant, Linda, answered on the third ring. Sterling Financial. Linda speaking. Hi, Linda, I said, forcing a smile into my voice. It's Amelia. Is Mark available, actually? Mrs. Grant. Mr. Grant is in a meeting. Linda said, her tone polite but distant. Can I take a message? No. That's okay. I said. I'll try him later. I hung up before she could ask why I was calling. Mark had meetings scheduled every day at this time, ever since he'd started his consulting business. Meetings that coincided with the ATM withdrawals. Meetings that provided the perfect cover for his extracurricular activities. The third thing I did was drive to the public library. It was quiet at this hour. Mostly empty except for a few homeless men sleeping at the tables and a grad student cramming for finals in the corner. I logged onto one of the library computers and typed Jessica, last name unknown, marketing Indianapolis into Google. The search yielded dozens of results. But none of them matched the woman Mark had described. Either Jessica wasn't her real name, or she wasn't who she claimed to be. I switched tactics and searched for Sterling Financial Indianapolis branch. The company had offices in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Detroit. According to their website, Mark had mentioned working with the Indianapolis branch on several occasions, always in vague terms that suggested he was overseeing operations remotely. Maybe Jessica worked there. Maybe she wasn't a marketing specialist at all. I printed the employee directory for the Indianapolis branch and studied the names. None of them jumped out at me. No Jessica. No obvious aliases. Just a list of faces and titles and phone extensions. I was about to give up when I noticed something strange. The IT manager, a guy named Kevin Patel, had the same area code as the credit union where Mark's wire transfers were going. Coincidence? Maybe. Probably not. I took a screenshot of the directory and sent it to Claire with a note. Check Kevin Patel. Indianapolis IT. Possible connection. Back at home, I packed a bag for Tyler and me. Toothbrushes, pajamas, his favorite stuffed bear, the dinosaur toys he slept with every night. I didn't tell him where we were going. I just said we were going on an adventure. Susan picked us up at 8:30. Tyler rode shotgun while I sat in the back with my bag. He chatted happily about school and cartoons and the new puppy he wanted for his birthday. He didn't know yet. Wouldn't know until we arrived at Susan's office and she explained everything in terms a 9-year-old could understand without breaking. Susan's office was sterile and efficient. All chrome and glass and leather furniture that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Tyler ran straight for the toy box in the corner, pulling out a plastic dinosaur with missing teeth and a lopsided grin. Susan greeted us at the door, her professional smile masking her concern. She'd seen hundreds of cases like mine, women blindsided by betrayal, abandoned without resources, forced to rebuild their lives from scratch. She knew the drill, knew the statistics, knew how many women caved under pressure and accepted unfair settlements because they felt they had no other choice. "What's the plan?" she asked, settling into her desk chair while Tyler arranged his dinosaurs in battle formation across her pristine carpet. "I'll sign whatever Mark wants," I said, watching Tyler's tiny green stegosaurus attack a purple triceratops with more enthusiasm than skill. "House, car, investments, everything. Just give me visitation rights with Tyler." Susan's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "Excuse me," I said. "I'll sign whatever he wants," I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the panic clawing at my throat. "Just tell me where to sign." Susan leaned forward, her elbows on her desk, her gaze locked on mine. "Amelia, honey, listen to me very carefully. Mark is hiding assets. I've suspected it for months. His business accounts don't match his reported income. His expense reports are fraudulent. He's been squirreling away money for God knows what purpose. And," I prompted, folding my hands in my lap to hide their trembling, "and if you agree to his terms without investigating further, you'll be signing away your rights to half of everything he owns." Susan insisted. "Half of everything he's hidden. Half of everything he's stolen." "I don't care," I said, staring at Tyler's dinosaur battle instead of meeting Susan's gaze. "Just give me what I want, time with my son." Susan sighed heavily and rubbed her temples with her fingertips. She'd been practicing law for 15 years, had seen every trick in the book, had heard every excuse, but nothing prepared her for clients like me, clients who willingly surrendered their futures because they valued pride over practicality. "Fine," she said finally, reaching for a stack of paperwork. "But I'm documenting everything. Every conversation, every concession. If you change your mind later, we'll have a paper trail to follow." "I won't change my mind," I promised. Susan nodded and began filling out forms with swift, efficient movements. Legal documents that would dismantle my marriage piece by piece. Property settlements that would leave me with nothing but memories and debt. Custody agreements that would grant Mark primary guardianship despite my objections. Tyler climbed into my lap while Susan worked, his small body warm against my chest. He smelled like strawberry shampoo and innocence and childhood. He trusted me implicitly, believed that mommy could fix anything, make everything better, protect him from harm. God, how I wished that were true. "Mommy, Tyler asked, tilting his head back to look up at me. His eyes were the exact shade of blue as Mark's, cornflower blue. Bright and clear and impossibly innocent. Is Daddy moving out? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, bracing myself for the conversation I'd been dreading since yesterday morning. How do you explain betrayal to a 9-year-old? How do you describe the collapse of a family unit without destroying their faith in love? Yes, sweetie, I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. Daddy's moving out. Why? Tyler asked, his lower lip beginning to tremble. Did I do something wrong? Did I break something? Did I? Oh, honey. No. I interrupted, hugging him tightly. This has nothing to do with you. Nothing at all. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Sometimes they grow apart. It's nobody's fault. But I want Daddy to stay. Tyler wailed, the dam breaking at last. Tears streamed down his cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dirt and grime of his day. I want us to stay together. Like always. Susan cleared her throat loudly and stood up from her desk. Professional courtesy demanded she give us privacy during emotional moments, even if those moments threatened to derail perfectly planned legal strategies. It's okay to be sad, baby, I whispered, rocking him back and forth. It's okay to cry. But you need to know something important. No matter where Daddy lives, no matter who he lives with, he'll always be your daddy, and I'll always be your mommy, and we'll always love you, no matter what. Tyler buried his face in my neck, his small body shaking with sobs. I held him while he cried, while he mourned the loss of his family, while he processed the seismic shift in his world, and I cried with him, silently, invisibly, for everything we'd lost and everything we'd yet to lose. When he finally fell asleep in my arms, Susan returned with a box of tissues and a fresh pot of coffee. She didn't say anything, just handed me the tissues and refilled my mug. Professional respect for grief. Understanding that sometimes the best comfort you can offer is silence. How long do you think it will take? I asked once Tyler's breathing had evened out and his grip on my shirt had loosened. 6 months to a year. Susan estimated, checking her watch, barring complications, which, given Mark's behavior, are inevitable. Complications like what? I asked, sipping my coffee to hide my fear. Like him changing his mind about custody, or discovering that his mistress isn't as wealthy as he hoped, or realizing that running a household solo with a 9-year-old is harder than he anticipated. I smiled faintly at that last possibility. Karma had a wicked sense of humor. When do we start? I asked, still returning to my spine, resolve hardening into determination. Right now, Susan replied, sliding the first document across her desk. Initial disclosures, asset declarations, preliminary agreements. It's going to be a long road. Amelia, are you sure about this? I'm sure. I confirmed, picking up the pen she offered. Let's get started. I signed the first document with a steady hand, then the second, then the third. Each signature felt like a small act of rebellion, a quiet refusal to let Mark win without a fight. By the time we left Susan's office, Tyler was perky and hungry, asking for pizza and ice cream and a trip to the park. I promised him all three, and we drove to a local pizzeria to celebrate the end of our old life and the beginning of our new one. The next day, I put the house on the market. Not because I wanted to sell it. I loved that old colonial, with its creaky floors and drafty windows and secret hiding spots in the attic, but because Mark had demanded it. He wanted the equity, the tax benefits, the status symbol. Fine. Let him have it. I also transferred the title of the car to his name and updated the registration with the DMV. I mailed the keys to his office with a note that read, "Enjoy your new ride." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. He knew who it was from. The hardest part was emptying Tyler's room. I packed up his clothes, his toys, his books, his artwork. I stacked the boxes in the garage and told myself I was just storing them until we found a new place. But I knew the truth. I was purging. Starting over. Cutting the cord. Claire called that evening with an update on Jessica. She's not who she says she is, Claire said, her voice tight with excitement. She's married. Amelia. To some guy named David Chen. They have 2 kids and a mortgage in Naperville. She's been lying to Mark this whole time. Figures. I said, staring at the boxes in the garage. What else? She works in HR. Not marketing. Claire continued. And get this, she's been having an affair with her boss. A married guy named Paul something or other. Mark's not her first victim. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Dark and sweet. Mark prided himself on his moral superiority. On his ability to spot weakness in others. The idea that he'd fallen for the same tricks he used on me was almost poetic. Keep digging. I said. Find out everything. I want to know what she's been telling him. I want to know what he's been telling her. Already on it. Claire said. What about the money? I'm working on it. I replied. Susan's looking into the wire transfers. We'll find something. We hung up. And I went inside to make dinner. Tyler was watching cartoons in the living room. His head propped up on a stack of pillows. He looked so small. So fragile. So unaware of the storm that was gathering around us. I put a frozen pizza in the oven and set the timer. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I had work to do. A war to wage. A plan to execute. And I was just getting started. The first crack came on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic explosion. Not a screaming match. Not even a pointed silence at the dinner table. Just a simple, sterile email from Mark's lawyer, Carl Whitman, attached to a PDF titled Preliminary Disclosure Statement. I recognized the font immediately, Calibri, 11 point, double-spaced. The same format Mark used for every business proposal, every budget report, every lie he ever told me about growth opportunities and strategic partnerships. I clicked it open while Tyler was at school and Susan was in court. The document was 27 pages long, listing every asset Mark claimed to own outright: the house on Maplewood Drive, the BMW 3 Series, the Sea Ray Sundancer, the Edward Jones portfolio, the 401k balance, the checking and savings accounts, even the goddamn lawn mower. It was comprehensive, meticulous, and utterly false. I forwarded the PDF to Susan with a single-line email, check page 14. Tell me that's not what I think it is. She called me within minutes. Are you sitting down? She asked without preamble. No. I said. Scrolling through the document again. Should I be, page 14? Susan repeated. Her voice tight. The wire transfers to the Indiana Credit Union. They are listed as business expenses. But the dates don't match any of his reported consulting projects. And the amounts, Jesus. Amelia. They are substantial. Over $200,000 in the last 18 months. I know. I said. My stomach twisting. I saw them too. But there's no documentation to support them. No invoices. No receipts. No contracts. Just a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet. Which means they're taxable income. Susan said. Or worse. Illegal income. If he's been skimming from his clients. If he's been laundering money through a shell account. We can blow this whole thing wide open. I don't want to blow it open. I said. My voice quieter than I intended. Not yet. Not until I'm ready. Susan sighed heavily. Amelia. If we file a motion to compel discovery. We can subpoena the credit union records. We can get his business ledgers. We can prove he's been hiding assets. And then what? I asked, closing the laptop and leaning back in my chair. Then we drag Tyler through a deposition. Then we make headlines in the Tribune. Then we win a settlement and lose our son in the process. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Susan argued. Mark's not going to stop until you make him. He's already moving his girlfriend into the house. He's already talking about selling the boat. He's already planning his new life without you and Tyler. Let him plan, I said, staring out the window at the bare branches of the oak tree in our backyard. Let him think he's won. The longer he believes that, the deeper he'll dig his own grave. Susan was quiet for a beat. Then she said, You're playing a dangerous game. I know. I agreed. But it's my game to play. We ended the call. And I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the disclosure statement. Mark had been thorough, almost obsessive, in his documentation. Every asset was accounted for. Every liability itemized. Every potential source of income listed. But the gaps were glaring. The inconsistencies obvious to anyone who knew where to look. The wire transfers were the biggest red flag. But they weren't the only ones. There were unexplained deposits from a company called Midwest Logistics, a shell corporation registered to a post office box in Gary, Indiana. There were rental payments for a storage unit in Hammond, paid in cash. There were even a series of PayPal transactions to a vendor named Precision Marine, all for amounts just under the reporting threshold. I compiled the information into a separate document, organizing the evidence by date and category. It was a tedious process, but it gave me something to focus on besides the ache in my chest, besides the way Tyler had started sleeping with his dinosaur collection again. Like he needed protection from the monsters in his closet. Claire called that evening with an update on Jessica. "She's panicking," Claire said, her voice tinged with glee. "David Chen found out about her affair. He kicked her out of the house and filed for divorce. She's staying with a friend in Schaumburg, but it's not permanent. She's been calling Mark nonstop, begging him to let her move in with him." "Of course she is," I said, setting the evidence file aside. "She's a leech. She latches onto men who can provide for her. Then she bleeds them dry and moves on to the next host." "What do you want me to do?" Claire asked. "Nothing," I said. "Yet. Let her dig her own hole. Let her get comfortable. The higher she climbs, the harder she falls." "You're enjoying this," Claire observed. "I'm savoring it," I corrected. "There's a difference." We hung up, and I went to check on Tyler. He was in his room, building a fort out of blankets and chairs. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up with a smile. "Mum, look, it's a castle," I smiled back, my heart breaking a little. "It's amazing. Baby, what's it for?" "It's for you and me," he said, crawling into the center of the fort. "So we can hide from the dragons." "Dragons," I repeated, sitting down beside him. "What kind of dragons?" "The mean ones," he said, his lower lip trembling. "The ones that take Daddy away." I pulled him into my lap and held him tight. "There are no dragons, sweetie. Not real ones. Dad is not a dragon. He's just a man who made a bad choice. But he's still my daddy," Tyler said, his voice small. "Always. I promised. No matter what." The next day, I met with Susan to discuss our next move. We sat in her office, the same room where I'd signed away my life 2 weeks earlier. Tyler was at school, and the office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the soft tick of the wall clock. "I've been thinking about your plan," Susan said, her hands folded on her desk. "It's risky, Amelia. If Mark finds out what you're doing, he could retaliate. He could file a motion to limit your visitation. He could claim you're alienating Tyler from him. He could do a lot of things." I interrupted, my voice steady. "But he won't. Not yet. He's too busy with his new life. Too busy playing house with his new girlfriend. Too busy convincing himself that he's won. And if he does find out," Susan pressed, "then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it," I said, standing up. "In the meantime, I want you to file a sealed motion for expanded discovery. Request the credit union records, the storage unit lease, the PayPal transaction logs. Request everything. But make sure it's sealed. I don't want Mark or his lawyer to know what we're doing." Susan stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're really going through with this?" "I'm really going through with this," I confirmed. "What happens when he realizes you're not as weak as you seem?" Susan asked, her voice soft. "Then he'll learn the hard way," I said, my smile cold, "that some women don't break. They bend. And when they snap back, they take everything with them." Susan shook her head, a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're a better liar than I am." "I'm not lying," I said, moving toward the door. "I'm just choosing my battles." The following week, Mark served me with a motion to expedite the custody hearing. He claimed that Tyler was distressed by our separation, that he was acting out at school, that he needed stability that only a 2-parent household could provide. It was a blatant attempt to undermine my visitation rights. A desperate move designed to paint me as an unfit mother. Susan filed a response the next day, citing Tyler's excellent grades, his involvement in extracurricular activities, and his stable relationship with both parents. She also included a statement from Tyler's teacher, praising his resilience and maturity in the face of adversity. The motion was denied, and the custody hearing was scheduled for 3 months out. Mark was furious. He called me twice that evening, leaving voicemails that alternated between pleading and threatening. The first voicemail was almost apologetic. "Amelia, please call me. We need to talk about Tyler. He's been crying, and I don't know what to do. I think he misses you. I think he needs you. Please, just pick up the phone." The second voicemail was pure venom. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can play games with me, manipulate the system, ruin my life? Well, guess what? You won't win. I'll fight you every step of the way. I'll take Tyler away from you. I'll make sure you never see him again." I deleted both messages without responding. I didn't need to dignify his tantrum with a reply. I didn't need to acknowledge his threats or his pleas. I just needed to keep moving forward. 2 days later, I received a package in the mail. It was addressed to me, but there was no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in block letters: "Watch this. Then decide if you still want to play nice." I stared at the note for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I inserted the USB drive into my laptop and clicked on the only video file it contained. The footage was grainy, shot from a distance, but the audio was crystal clear. Mark was in a hotel room, his shirt off, his pants unbuttoned. Jessica was on her knees in front of him, her dress pulled up around her waist. They were arguing, their voices low and urgent. "We need to slow down," Jessica said, her tone sharp. "David's starting to suspect something. He hired a private investigator." "Then tell him it's nothing," Mark replied, his hands tangled in her hair. "Tell him you're stressed. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. But don't pull away from me. Jess, don't leave me like everyone else." "I'm not everyone else," Jessica snapped. "I'm trying to protect us. I'm trying to protect our future." "Our future?" Mark laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "What future? You're married. You have 2 kids. You're trapped in a life you hate. And now you want me to believe you're going to leave it all behind for me." "I love you," Jessica said, her voice cracking. "Bullshit," Mark said, pushing her away. "You love the way I make you feel. You love the way I can give you everything you've never had. But you don't love me. You never have." The video ended abruptly, mid-argument. I sat there for a long time, staring at the frozen image on my screen. Mark's face twisted with anger and confusion. Jessica's face streaked with tears and mascara. It was ugly. It was pathetic. It was everything I'd ever suspected and more. I forwarded the video to Claire with a single word: proof. She called me back within minutes. "Are you seeing this?" she asked, her voice barely containing her excitement. "I'm seeing it," I said, closing the laptop. "What do we do with it?" "We hold onto it," Claire said. "For now. Use it as leverage if we need it. But don't show it to Mark yet. Let him squirm a little longer." "Agreed," I said. "Any updates on the credit union?" "I'm working on it," Claire replied. "But it's proving difficult. The account is under a corporate name, and the signatures are forged. We'll need a court order to get the real owner's information." "Then get the court order," I said. "Whatever it takes." We hung up, and I went to the kitchen to make dinner. Tyler was watching cartoons at the table, his spoon poised over a bowl of cereal. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up with a smile. "Mum, guess what? My teacher said I'm the best reader in the class." "That's amazing, baby," I said, kissing the top of his head. "What are you reading?" "Harry Potter," he said, his eyes shining. "Can we get the next book?" "Absolutely," I promised, pulling a chair beside him. "As soon as we finish this one." We sat there for a while, eating cereal and talking about Hogwarts and magic spells and the importance of friendship. It was a normal moment. A precious moment. A reminder that despite everything, some things remained constant. Some things were worth fighting for. Later that evening, after Tyler had gone to bed, I sat down at my laptop and reviewed the evidence file one more time. The wire transfers, the shell corporations, the fake invoices, the hotel surveillance footage. It was all there, neatly organized and ready for deployment. Mark thought he was playing chess. He thought he was 3 moves ahead, that he'd checkmated me with his demand for everything. But he was wrong. I wasn't playing chess. I was playing poker. And I had a royal flush. The mask slipped on a Thursday. Not in a courtroom. Not in a heated argument. Not even in a moment of quiet vulnerability. It happened in the produce aisle of Jewel-Osco. Of all places. With a display of overripe bananas and a cart full of organic kale. I was comparing the price of avocados when I saw them. Mark was in the next aisle, bent over a pyramid of apples. His back to me. Jessica was beside him, her hand resting on his arm, her body angled toward his like she was trying to merge into his personal space. They were laughing about something. The sound carrying over the drone of the refrigerators. A low, intimate chuckle that made my stomach clench. I should have kept walking. Should have pretended I didn't see them. Should have focused on the goddamn avocados. But I didn't. I froze, my hand still hovering over the bin, and watched. Jessica was wearing a pair of yoga pants and a fitted t-shirt that clung to her curves. She'd changed her hair, too, gone from the sleek bob to long, flowing waves that looked expensive and deliberate. She looked like a woman who'd just had a makeover. A woman who was trying to replace me in every possible way. Mark straightened up, and their eyes met across the produce section. He went pale. Not the kind of pale that comes from illness, but the kind that comes from guilt. The kind that says, caught in the act. Jessica followed his gaze and saw me, and her expression shifted from amusement to something colder, sharper. Calculation. Amelia. Mark said, his voice too casual. What a surprise. What a surprise. I repeated, turning to face them fully. I was holding a single avocado. The skin still cool from the bin. I set it back down. My hands suddenly steady. Shopping for dinner, yeah. Mark said, glancing at the cart beside him. It was full of pre-washed greens, artisanal bread, and a bottle of Pinot Grigio. Healthy stuff. For the week. How thoughtful, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. I'm sure Jessica appreciates it. Jessica's smile tightened, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, her hand still on Mark's arm, her eyes locked on mine like she was trying to intimidate me, like she thought she could win a staring contest with the woman who'd raised her husband's child. We're in a rush, Mark said. His voice clipped. We have reservations. At the Purple Pig? I asked, naming the trendy restaurant where Mark had taken me for our 10th anniversary, where he'd proposed to me. Actually, with a ring hidden in the dessert menu. Something like that, he said, avoiding my gaze. Well, enjoy your meal, I said, turning to leave. And your relationship? I made it 3 steps before Jessica called out. You know, Amelia, it's not too late to be civil. Mark and I are happy. We're building a life together. You should be happy for us. I stopped and turned back, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slap her. I wanted to tell her that she was a homewrecker, a liar, a user. But I didn't. I just smiled. A slow, cold curve of my lips. I am happy for you, I said, my voice smooth. Really? I hope it works out. For all of us. I left them there, standing in the produce aisle, surrounded by the smell of citrus and the hum of the freezers. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning with a mix of anger and insecurity. They were afraid of me. Good. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the public library, researching the legal implications of adultery in Illinois divorce cases. The state was a no-fault jurisdiction, which meant that infidelity didn't affect property division or alimony, but it could influence custody decisions, especially if one parent's behavior was deemed detrimental to the child. I printed the relevant statutes and case law, adding them to my evidence file. I also found a local PI who specialized in marital surveillance. His rates were steep, but I had money saved from my bookkeeping days, and I was willing to spend it. The PI's name was Frank DeLuca, a retired cop with a thick mustache and a no-nonsense attitude. We met at a diner in Arlington Heights, the kind of place with vinyl booths and a laminated menu. He sipped his coffee while I outlined what I needed. "I want proof of adultery," I said, sliding a copy of the hotel video across the table. "And I want to know everything about Jessica's financial situation, bank accounts, credit cards, employment records, especially any money she's been receiving from Mark." Frank raised an eyebrow. "You're not playing around, are you?" "I'm not playing at all," I said, my hands wrapped around my coffee mug. "I need this done discreetly. No contact with Mark or Jessica. No traceable inquiries. Can you handle that?" "I can handle it," Frank said, pocketing the video. "But it'll take time. And it won't be cheap." "I have the time," I said. "And the money." He nodded, satisfied. "I'll start with the financials. See what I can dig up on this Jessica character. In the meantime, you should be careful. Your husband's not stupid. If he catches wind of this, he'll come after you." "Let him," I said, a cold smile tugging at my lips. "I'm not the same woman he left 2 months ago." Frank chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "I believe that." We finished our meeting, and I went home to find Tyler in the backyard, building a treehouse with the neighbor's kid. He was covered in dirt and grinning from ear to ear, his hands full of nails and a hammer that was too big for him. "Mum, look, I'm making a fort, it's amazing." "Baby," I said, kissing the top of his head, "but be careful with that hammer." "I will," he promised, swinging the tool with all the confidence of a 9-year-old who'd never seen a splinter. I watched him for a while, my heart swelling with a mix of love and fear. Love for the boy he was, the boy he'd always be. Fear for the world I was trying to build for him, the world that was still so fragile, so uncertain. That evening, Mark called, his voice tight with tension. "We need to talk," he said, without preamble. "About what?" I asked, my tone neutral. "About this," he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice. "About you. About what you're doing." I felt a jolt of adrenaline, but I didn't let it show. "I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play dumb, Amelia," he snapped. "I know you're behind the subpoenas. I know you're working with a PI. I know you're trying to destroy me." "I'm not trying to destroy you," I said, my voice calm. "I'm just trying to get what's fair." "Fair?" he scoffed. "You're the one who agreed to my terms. You're the one who signed away your rights. You're the one who, I'm the one who's been left with nothing." I interrupted, my voice rising. "I'm the one who's been betrayed, abandoned, and humiliated. I'm the one who's been trying to pick up the pieces of a life you destroyed. And you have the audacity to talk to me about fair." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Mark said, his voice quieter, "I'm sorry." I laughed. A short, bitter sound. "You're sorry? You're sorry? You're sorry for what?" "Mark? For cheating on me? For lying to me? For treating me like a second-class citizen in my own home? What exactly are you sorry for?" "I'm sorry for everything," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry for the way I handled this. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused you and Tyler. I didn't know how to do it differently." I closed my eyes, my heart aching in a way I hadn't expected. I wanted to hate him. I needed to hate him. But hearing the raw pain in his voice, the genuine remorse, made it harder to cling to my anger. "It's too late for apologies, Mark," I said, my voice softer now. "Too late for regrets. All we can do now is move forward. I want to fix this," he said, desperation creeping into his tone. "For Tyler's sake. For ours. Can we at least try to be civil? Can we at least try to co-parent without all this hostility?" "I can try," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But only for Tyler." "Thank you," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank you." We hung up, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. I felt like I'd just negotiated a ceasefire with the enemy. Like I'd just agreed to a temporary truce with the man who'd broken my heart. But I knew better. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day, Susan called with an update. We got the credit union records, she said, her voice triumphant. The account belongs to a shell company called Precision Logistics, which is registered to a P.O. box in Gary. The signatory is a man named Victor Rinaldi, who has a long rap sheet for fraud and embezzlement. It's a classic money laundering operation. Amelia, your husband is neck deep in this. I figured as much, I said, my hands tightening around the phone. What about the storage unit? Same story, Susan replied. The lease is under Rinaldi's name, but the payments are coming from Mark's personal account. We've got him. Amelia, we've got him dead to rights. Good, I said, my voice cold. Now we wait. Wait for what? Susan asked. For the right moment, I said, staring out the window at the grey sky. For the moment when he thinks he's won. When he thinks he's safe. When he lets his guard down. Susan was quiet for a beat. Then she said, you're playing a dangerous game. I know. I agreed. But it's my game to play. Later that week, I received another package in the mail. This one was smaller, lighter, and wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a flash drive and a note written in Jessica's loopy cursive, he's lying to you. About everything. Watch this. Then decide who you can trust. My hands shook as I inserted the flash drive into my laptop. The video was shorter than the first one. Just a snippet of a conversation between Mark and Jessica in what looked like a parking garage. We need to be careful, Jessica was saying, her voice low and urgent. Victor's getting nervous. He thinks the feds are onto him. Tell him to relax. Mark replied, his tone dismissive. We're clean. The money's laundered. The accounts are hidden. Nobody will ever find out. And if they do, Jessica pressed. What happens then? What happens to us? Then we run. Mark said, his voice hardening. We disappear. We start over somewhere new. Together. Together. Jessica echoed. Her voice barely audible. The video ended. And I sat there for a long time. My mind racing. Victor Rinaldi. The name sent chills down my spine. He was a known associate of organized crime figures in Chicago. A man who'd been investigated for everything from insurance fraud to racketeering. If Mark was working with him, if he was laundering money through his shell companies, he was in way over his head. And Jessica knew about it. She'd known all along. I forwarded the video to Claire with a single word, trouble. She called me back within minutes. What is this? She asked. Her voice sharp. It's trouble, I said, closing the laptop. Big trouble. Mark's not just hiding assets. He's laundering money. He's working with a known criminal. And Jessica knows everything. Shit, Claire said, her voice dropping. What do? We keep digging, I said, my resolve hardening. We find out everything. Every dirty secret. Every illegal transaction. Every lie. Then we wait for the right moment to strike. And if Mark finds out? Claire asked. Then we run, I said, echoing Mark's words from the video. We disappear. We start over somewhere new. Together. But unlike Mark and Jessica, we wouldn't be running from the truth. We'd be running toward justice. The courthouse clock struck 9 on a Wednesday morning. And the air in the domestic relations division was already thick with the scent of stale coffee and quiet desperation. I sat in the back of courtroom B, watching the bailiff call the docket. The room was half empty. Just a handful of attorneys, a few anxious litigants, and a young mother with a toddler who refused to sit still. Susan was at the plaintiff's table, her suit jacket draped over the back of her chair, her fingers tapping a rhythm on her legal pad. I was in the gallery, Tyler's hand tucked safely in mine, the other clutching a manila folder. Inside were the sealed documents, the evidence, the proof, the things I'd been collecting for months. The things I was about to use. Carl Whitman, Mark's attorney, was at the defense table, his face a mask of confidence. He'd been in this game a long time. And he played it well. He was the kind of lawyer who made you feel like you were already losing. even before the gavel dropped. State of Illinois. County of Cook. In the matter of the marriage of Mark Thomas Grant and Amelia Rose Grant. The clerk intoned. Her voice flat. Case number 26, DR 48291. Appearances: Ms. Susan Kessler for the petitioner. Mr. Carl Whitman for the respondent. Any motions before the court? Susan stood. Her posture perfect. Her voice steady. Your Honor. The petitioner requests a continuance of the final hearing. We are in receipt of new financial information that requires additional analysis. Carl rose. His expression indignant. Objection. Your Honor. This is a delay tactic. The petitioner has had months to prepare. The financial information she's referring to is irrelevant. It's based on hearsay and speculation. Judge Mayers, a stern woman with iron gray hair and a reputation for efficiency, looked from Susan to Carl and back again. On what grounds? Ms. Kessler, on the grounds of newly discovered evidence. Your Honor. Susan said, her voice unwavering. Evidence that suggests the respondent has engaged in fraudulent conduct, including but not limited to the concealment of assets and the misrepresentation of income. Carl scoffed. Your Honor. This is preposterous. My client has complied with every discovery request. He's been transparent and forthcoming. The petitioner is simply trying to renegotiate a settlement she already agreed to. I'm not renegotiating, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I'm enforcing the law. All eyes in the courtroom turned to me. I stood, my hands clasped in front of me, my expression calm. I'd been dreading this moment. But now that it was here, I felt a strange sense of peace. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Judge Mayers raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Grant, you may approach the bench. I walked to the front of the courtroom, my heels clicking against the tile floor. The bailiff eyed me warily, but said nothing. I stopped a few feet from the judge's bench, my eyes level with hers. Your Honor, I have reason to believe that my husband has concealed significant assets and engaged in financial misconduct, I said, my voice low but clear. I have provided my attorney with evidence of wire transfers, shell companies, and associations with known criminals. I'm not seeking to renegotiate the settlement. I'm seeking to ensure that the division of assets is fair and equitable, as required by law. Judge Mayers studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Carl. Mr. Whitman, is it true that your client has been involved in a business relationship with a man named Victor Rinaldi? Carl paled, but only slightly. Your Honor, I'm aware of the allegations, but they are unproven. My client denies any wrongdoing. I see, Judge Mayers said, her tone clipped. And what about the wire transfers to the Indiana Credit Union? The ones listed as business expenses on the preliminary disclosure statement, those are legitimate business expenses. Your Honor, Carl insisted. My client's consulting business involves interstate travel and equipment rentals. The transfers are fully documented. Documented or fabricated? I asked, my voice sharp. Judge Mayers silenced me with a glance. I will not have this devolve into a spectacle. Mrs. Grant, Mr. Whitman, I will grant a continuance of 1 week. During that time, I expect you to provide the court with a full accounting of your client's financial affairs, including the nature and purpose of the wire transfers in question. Ms. Kessler, you are to provide any additional evidence you wish to submit. The final hearing is rescheduled for 1 week from today. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, we said in unison. I returned to my seat, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd forced the issue. And the judge had listened. Now we had a week to prepare. A week to gather the final pieces of the puzzle. The hearing adjourned, and the courtroom emptied quickly. Carl brushed past me without a word, his face a mask of fury. Susan lingered, her eyes bright with excitement. That was brilliant, she said, squeezing my arm. You were incredible. Judge Mayers rarely grants continuances at this stage of proceedings. You really rattled Carl. I rattled him? I asked, my voice dry. I think I terrified him. Susan laughed. Maybe a little. But don't worry. We've got this. We have everything we need to expose Mark's scheme. Do we? I asked, my gaze drifting to the empty defense table. Or do we just think we do? Susan followed my gaze and sighed. You're worried. I'm always worried, I admitted. But this time it's different. This time, the stakes are higher. If we fail, Mark wins. He keeps everything. And Tyler and I get nothing. We're not going to fail, Susan said, her voice firm. We have the goods on him. We have the evidence. We have the law on our side. All we need is patience. Patience, I repeated, my voice barely audible. Right. We left the courthouse. The bright spring sun a stark contrast to the cold sterility of the courtroom. Tyler ran ahead of us, chasing a pigeon across the plaza. He looked happy, carefree, oblivious to the storm that was gathering around us. Mum, look, I'm gonna catch it, be careful, baby, I called after him, my heart aching. Don't run too far. Susan and I walked in silence for a moment, the weight of the hearing settling over us like a heavy blanket. Then she said, You've come a long way in a short time. Have I? I asked, surprised. You have, she confirmed. When we first met, you were broken, lost. You didn't know which way was up. But now you're fierce, determined. You're a warrior, Amelia. And warriors don't lose. I smiled, despite the lump in my throat. Thanks, Susan. Anytime, she said, squeezing my arm again. Now come on. Let's get some lunch. You deserve a break. We found a little cafe nearby and ordered sandwiches and iced tea. Tyler chased fries across the table while we talked. Our voices low so as not to disturb the other patrons. I spoke with Frank DeLuca, Susan said, lowering her voice. He found more on Jessica. She's been embezzling from her employer, a dental practice in Schaumburg. She's been diverting payments to a personal account for the last 2 years. Frank has the bank records to prove it. Of course she has, I said, shaking my head. She's a thief. She steals whatever she can't earn. And Mark knows, Susan added. Frank found emails between them discussing the scheme. Mark even offered to help her launder the money. My stomach churned. He's as dirty as she is. Dirty enough. Susan agreed. Which means we have leverage. Big leverage. I'm saving it, I said, my voice cold. For the right moment. Susan nodded, understanding. We finished our lunch in relative silence, the weight of our conversation hanging in the air between us. Tyler was content, his belly full and his mood sunny. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine a future where this was all behind us, where Tyler could chase pigeons without worrying about court dates and depositions, where I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning. But I knew better. The calm before the storm was always the hardest part. That evening, Mark called. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the tremor underneath. We need to talk, he said, without preamble. About what? I asked, my tone neutral. About the hearing, he said, his voice clipped. About what you're trying to do. I'm not trying to do anything, I said, my voice calm. I'm just asking the court to enforce the law. Law? He scoffed. You mean your vendetta? Your obsession with destroying me? What happened to wanting what's best for Tyler? Tyler is my priority, I said, my voice hardening. But I won't let you cheat him out of what's rightfully his. I won't let you steal his future. Steal? He echoed, his voice rising. I earned everything I have. I built it from the ground up. You didn't lift a finger. I lifted our son. I shot back. I lifted our family. I lifted you when you were too drunk to stand. I lifted our marriage when you forgot what it meant. And you repay me by cheating, lying, and stealing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Mark said, his voice quieter, I made mistakes. You made choices. I corrected. Bad choices. Choices that hurt me. Hurt Tyler. Hurt yourself. I know, he said, his voice cracking. I know I fucked up. I know I hurt you. But I'm trying to fix it. I'm trying to make things right. You can't fix this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Some things aren't fixable. We hung up. And I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. I felt like I'd just severed the last tie to my old life. Like I'd finally accepted that Mark wasn't coming back. That he couldn't come back. Because the man I'd married was gone. And in his place was a stranger. A thief. A liar. A coward. The next day, I received a package in the mail. This one was different. Smaller. Heavier. Wrapped in black paper. With no return address. I stared at it for a long time. My heart pounding. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know what was inside. But I had to. I slit the tape with a knife and lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of documents. A flash drive. And a note written in a familiar hand. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear. I'll fix it. I'll make it right. Just don't do this. Please. It was from Mark. I thumbed through the documents. My eyes scanning the pages. Bank statements. Tax returns. Emails. They were all there. The evidence of his crimes. The proof of his deceit. The things I'd been looking for. The things I'd been waiting for. The flash drive contained more videos. More conversations. More proof. Mark and Jessica arguing about the money. Mark threatening Victor Rinaldi. Mark promising to take care of everything if Jessica would just trust him. I forwarded the files to Susan and Claire, then sat back in my chair. My mind reeling. Mark had given me the ammunition I needed. He'd handed me the gun and loaded it for me. But why? Was it guilt? Fear? Desperation? Or was it something else? I didn't have time to wonder. I had a hearing to prepare for. A case to win. A life to reclaim. I closed the lid of the box and tucked it away in the back of my closet. Next to the other secrets I was keeping. The storm was coming. And I was ready. The fluorescent lights in courtroom B buzzed with a low, persistent hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It was 8:45 a.m. Exactly 15 minutes before the final hearing was scheduled to begin. And the room was already crowded with spectators, reporters, and court personnel. The word had leaked. Somehow, the media had gotten wind of the high-profile divorce case involving Mark Grant, the rising star of Sterling Financial, and his estranged wife, Amelia. The Chicago Tribune, the Sun-Times, even a local TV crew with a camera operator and a boom mic had staked out positions near the entrance. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands resting on the manila folder in front of me. Inside were the sealed documents, the evidence, the proof, the things I'd been collecting for months, the things I was about to unleash. Susan was beside me, her suit jacket buttoned, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a general preparing for battle, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid. Across the aisle, Carl Whitman was conferring with Mark in hushed tones. Mark looked pale, drawn, like a man who hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He kept glancing at me, his expression a mix of fear and defiance. He knew. Somehow, he knew what was coming. The bailiff called the court to order at precisely 9:00 a.m. Judge Mayers entered the room, her robes rustling, her expression stern. She took her seat behind the bench, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk surveying its prey. All rise, the bailiff intoned. We rose, and the judge settled into her chair. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the lights and the soft shuffle of papers. Be seated, Judge Mayers said, her voice crisp. This court is now in session. Case number 26, DR 48291. State of Illinois. County of Cook. In the matter of the marriage of Mark Thomas Grant and Amelia Rose Grant. Appearances, Ms. Susan Kessler for the petitioner. Mr. Carl Whitman for the respondent. Any preliminary matters? Susan stood, her posture perfect, her voice steady. Your Honor, the petitioner requests that the sealed documents previously submitted to the court be admitted into evidence. Carl Whitman rose, his face flushed with indignation. Objection. Your Honor, these documents are irrelevant, prejudicial, and were obtained through improper means. They contain hearsay, speculation, and unverified allegations. My client objects to their admission on the grounds of relevance, authenticity, and procedural fairness. Judge Mayers turned to me, her eyes piercing. Mrs. Grant, you may approach the bench. I stood and walked to the front of the courtroom, my heels clicking against the tile floor. The reporters leaned forward in their seats, their pens poised over their notepads. The camera operator adjusted his lens, the red light glowing like a malevolent eye. Your Honor, I said, my voice low but clear. The sealed documents contain evidence of fraudulent conduct, including but not limited to the concealment of assets, the misrepresentation of income, and the laundering of funds through shell companies. This evidence is directly relevant to the division of marital assets, as required by Section 503 of the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act. It is authentic, as it includes bank records, tax returns, and correspondence between the parties, and it was obtained through lawful means, pursuant to a court-ordered discovery process. Judge Mayers studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Carl. Mr. Whitman, you have 1 week to respond to the petitioner's motion. In the meantime, I will review the sealed documents in chambers. The hearing is adjourned until this matter is resolved. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with a sharp crack, and the room erupted into a flurry of activity. Reporters surged toward the bench, their microphones extended like weapons. Carl Whitman brushed past me, his face a mask of fury. Mark stood frozen in his seat, his eyes wide with shock. Susan caught my arm as I turned to leave. That was incredible, she said, her voice low. You were magnificent. Judge Mayers rarely admits sealed evidence at this stage of proceedings. You really got to her. I got to her. I agreed, my heart pounding. But at what cost? Susan followed my gaze to the crowd of reporters. They're going to have a field day with this. The story writes itself. Corporate executive, hidden assets, divorce scandal. It's tabloid gold. Let them write, I said, my voice cold. Let them speculate. Let them dig. The truth will come out eventually. We left the courthouse through a side exit, the press swarming the main entrance like vultures circling a carcass. Susan's car was parked in a loading zone, and we ducked inside, the cool air conditioning a welcome relief from the press and the heat. What now? Susan asked, starting the engine. Now we wait, I said, staring out the window at the blur of traffic. We wait for Judge Mayers to review the evidence. We wait for Carl to file his response. We wait for the other shoe to drop. Susan nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. You're worried. I'm always worried, I admitted. But this time it's different. This time, the stakes are higher. If Judge Mayers rejects the evidence, if she sides with Carl, we lose everything. Mark keeps the house, the car, the boat, the investments. He keeps Tyler. And we get nothing. We're not going to lose, Susan said, her voice firm. We have the goods on him. We have the evidence. We have the law on our side. All we need is patience. Patience, I repeated, my voice barely audible. Right. We drove to Susan's office in silence, the weight of the hearing settling over us like a heavy blanket. Tyler was at school, and the office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the soft tick of the wall clock. Susan poured us both a cup of coffee, black and bitter, and handed me a file. Frank DeLuca's latest report, she said. He found more on Victor Rinaldi. The FBI has been investigating him for money laundering and racketeering. They've had him under surveillance for months. Frank thinks Mark's involved in the scheme, that he's been using Rinaldi to launder money from his consulting business. I flipped through the report, my eyes scanning the pages. Surveillance photos, bank records, transcripts of intercepted phone calls. It was all there. The evidence of Mark's crimes, the proof of his deceit, the things I'd been looking for, the things I'd been waiting for. This is it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. This is the smoking gun. It is, Susan agreed. And if we play our cards right, we can use it to bring Mark down. Not just in divorce court, but in criminal court. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. The pieces were falling into place. The puzzle almost complete. But there was still one piece missing. The most important piece of all. What about Jessica? I asked. Susan's expression darkened. Frank found more on her too. She's been embezzling from her employer, a dental practice in Schaumburg. She's been diverting payments to a personal account for the last 2 years. Frank has the bank records to prove it. And get this, she's been working with Mark to launder the money. They've been partners in crime. Amelia. Literally. Of course they are, I said, shaking my head. They deserve each other. They do. Susan agreed. But we can use that against them. We can use Jessica to get to Mark. We can use her greed, her ambition, her fear. We can turn her into our star witness. I smiled. A cold, hard curve of my lips. Let's hope she's as scared as she should be. The next day, I received a call from Judge Mayer's chambers. Her clerk informed me that the judge had reviewed the sealed documents and had scheduled a special hearing for the following Monday. The hearing would be closed to the public and the press, and only the parties and their attorneys would be allowed to attend. She's taking this seriously, Susan said when I relayed the news. Very seriously. This is our chance. Amelia. Our one and only chance to present the evidence and convince her to rule in our favor. I know, I said, my hands tightening around the phone. I just hope it's enough. It will be. Susan insisted. It has to be. We spent the weekend preparing, reviewing the evidence, rehearsing our arguments, anticipating Carl's objections. We worked late into the night. Fueled by coffee and determination, Tyler was with Claire, and the house was quiet except for the sound of our voices and the soft hum of the computer. What if we lose? I asked Susan on Sunday evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. We're not going to lose, Susan said, her voice firm. We have the evidence. We have the law. We have the truth. And we have you. You're the strongest person I know. Amelia. You're not going to let this defeat you. I smiled, despite the lump in my throat. Thanks, Susan. Anytime, she said, squeezing my arm. Now let's get some rest. We have a big day ahead of us. Monday morning arrived with a bone-chilling rain. I dressed in a simple black suit, the same one I'd worn to Mark's office Christmas party 2 years ago. It fit perfectly, the skirt hitting just above the knee, the jacket tailored to my frame. I pulled my hair back in a low ponytail, the way I used to when I was a girl, and applied minimal makeup. I wanted to look professional, composed, unbreakable. Susan picked me up at 7:30 a.m., and we drove to the courthouse in silence. The rain beat against the windshield, the wipers swishing back and forth in a steady rhythm. The city looked grey and washed out, the buildings blurred by the mist. Nervous? Susan asked, glancing at me. Terrified, I admitted. But I'm also determined. I'm not going to let him win. Susan, I'm not going to let him take everything and walk away like nothing happened. He's not going to win, Susan said, her voice steady. We're going to make sure of that. We arrived at the courthouse at 8:00 a.m., and the security line was already long. We showed our IDs to the bailiff, who waved us through without a second glance. The courtroom was empty except for a court reporter and a bailiff, who were setting up the equipment. Judge Mayers arrived at 8:45 a.m., her robes rustling, her expression stern. She took her seat behind the bench, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk surveying its prey. All rise, the bailiff intoned. We rose, and the judge settled into her chair. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the lights and the soft shuffle of papers. Be seated, Judge Mayers said, her voice crisp. This hearing is convened pursuant to my order dated March 15, 2026. The purpose of this hearing is to determine the admissibility and relevance of certain sealed documents submitted by the petitioner. The hearing is closed to the public and the press. Any unauthorized disclosure of the proceedings shall result in sanctions. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, we said in unison. Judge Mayers turned to Susan. Ms. Kessler, you may proceed. Susan stood, her posture perfect, her voice steady. She began by outlining the evidence, presenting each document in turn. The wire transfers to the Indiana Credit Union, the shell companies registered to Victor Rinaldi, the rental agreements for the storage units in Hammond, the PayPal transactions to Precision Marine, the emails between Mark and Jessica discussing their schemes, the surveillance footage from the hotel room and the parking garage. She presented expert testimony from a forensic accountant, who explained how the money had been laundered through the shell companies and deposited into Mark's personal accounts. She presented testimony from a private investigator, who detailed Mark's association with Victor Rinaldi and his involvement in the money laundering scheme. She presented testimony from Tyler's teacher, who praised my parenting skills and attested to Tyler's emotional stability. Carl objected repeatedly, arguing that the evidence was irrelevant, prejudicial, and obtained through improper means. He argued that the wire transfers were legitimate business expenses, that the shell companies were unrelated to Mark's consulting business, that the rental agreements were for equipment storage, that the PayPal transactions were for supplies. He argued that the emails were taken out of context, that the surveillance footage was inconclusive, that the expert testimony was speculative. But Judge Mayers was unmoved. She listened to Carl's objections, considered his arguments, but ultimately ruled in our favor. She admitted the evidence into the record, finding it relevant, authentic, and admissible. She found that Mark had concealed assets, misrepresented his income, and engaged in fraudulent conduct. She found that Jessica had collaborated with Mark in his schemes, that she had embezzled funds from her employer, and that she had conspired with Mark to launder money. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Mayers said, her voice ringing with authority, the court finds that the respondent has engaged in fraudulent conduct and has concealed assets from the petitioner. The court further finds that the prenuptial agreement entered into by the parties is invalid and unenforceable, as it was procured through fraud and misrepresentation. The court hereby orders that the division of marital assets be reopened, and that the respondent shall be required to disclose all assets, both known and unknown, and to provide a full accounting of his income and expenses. The court further orders that the petitioner shall be awarded sole custody of the minor child, with the respondent granted supervised visitation. The respondent shall be responsible for the payment of child support, alimony, and the costs of the proceedings. This order is effective immediately. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I didn't show it. I just sat there, my hands clasped in my lap, my expression composed. I had won. I had really won. Carl was on his feet, his face red with fury. Objection. Your Honor, this is outrageous. This is a travesty of justice. My client will appeal. He will not be bullied by this witch hunt. Judge Mayers silenced him with a glance. Mr. Whitman, you may file an appeal if you wish, but this court's ruling stands. The hearing is adjourned. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with a sharp crack, and the room erupted into a flurry of activity. Carl brushed past me, his face a mask of fury. Mark stood frozen in his seat, his eyes wide with shock. Susan caught my arm as I turned to leave. You did it, she said, her voice low. You really did it. I did. I agreed, my heart pounding. But it's not over. Not yet. We left the courthouse through a side exit, the rain still falling in a steady curtain. The press was still camped outside, but they didn't recognize me without the suit and the press badge. I was just another woman in a black coat, another face in the crowd. What now? Susan asked, starting the engine. Now we wait, I said, staring out the window at the blur of traffic. We wait for Mark to comply with the court's order. We wait for the appeals process. We wait for the other shoe to drop. He's not going to give up, Susan warned. He's going to fight. He's going to lash out. He's going to try to destroy you. Let him try, I said, my voice cold. I'm not the same woman he left 2 months ago. I'm not the same woman he thought he could control. I'm stronger now. Smarter. I'm not going to let him win. Susan nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. You're going to be okay, Amelia. I know you are. I know. I agreed. a small smile tugging at my lips. I'm going to be just fine. We drove to my sister's house, where Tyler was waiting with a plate of cookies and a glass of milk. He ran to me as soon as I walked in the door, his arms outstretched. Mum, you're home. Did you win? Did you get the house? Did you get the car? Did you get Daddy's money? I hugged him tight, my heart swelling with love. I did, baby. I did. I got the house, the car, the money, and the boat. I got everything. And I got you. I got you all to myself. Tyler beamed, his face lighting up with joy. Yay! Does that mean we can get a puppy? Can we? Can we? I laughed, despite the tears in my eyes. We'll talk about it. Okay, he agreed, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward the kitchen. Come on, Mum. Let's eat cookies. I followed him, my heart lighter than it had been in months. I had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. Mark was still out there, plotting his next move. Jessica was still out there, waiting to betray him again. The FBI was still out there, investigating the money laundering scheme. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. I was strong. I was free. The moment we walked out of the courthouse with the judge's final order in hand, I felt the weight of the entire world shift off my shoulders. Not because the fight was over, far from it, but because the first, most critical battle had been won. The legal scales had tipped. The truth, which had been buried under layers of deception and manipulation, was now part of the official record. And Mark, for all his bluster and calculated arrogance, had been publicly and unequivocally exposed. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of frantic motion. Reporters who had been camped outside the courthouse like vultures now swarmed around me, thrusting microphones in my face and shouting questions about the ruling. Cameras flashed, capturing every angle of my face, every nuance of my expression. The story had broken on the evening news. Sterling financial executive accused of hiding assets in divorce battle. The headlines were lurid, sensational, and devastating for Mark's carefully cultivated public image. Susan handled the media circus with the precision of a seasoned general. She issued a brief statement on my behalf, declining to comment on the specifics of the case while affirming my commitment to protecting my son and ensuring a fair division of assets. She made it clear that I intended to comply with the court's order and cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation. Beyond that, she drew a firm line. No interviews, no photo ops, no opportunities for Mark's legal team to twist my words or spin the narrative in his favor. Meanwhile, the wheels of justice began to turn with terrifying speed. Within hours of the judge's ruling, federal agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI's Chicago field office executed a series of coordinated raids on Mark's office, his home, and several storage facilities linked to Victor Rinaldi. The raids were conducted with military precision. The agents armed with search warrants that allowed them to seize computers, financial records, and any other evidence related to the money laundering operation. I watched the footage on the evening news, my hands clenched around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Mark was shown being led out of his office in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn, his expensive suit rumpled and disheveled. He looked like a man who had finally been cornered, a man who had run out of options. The sight should have filled me with vindication, and to a certain extent, it did, but it also filled me with a profound sense of sadness. This wasn't the man I had married. This wasn't the man who had promised to love and cherish me forever. This was a stranger, a criminal, a cautionary tale. The fallout from the raids was immediate and widespread. Sterling Financial released a terse statement announcing that Mark had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. His name was scrubbed from the company website, his picture removed from the corporate leadership page. Clients began withdrawing their accounts, wary of the negative publicity and the potential legal ramifications. The stock price, which had been steadily climbing for years, took a nosedive, wiping out millions of dollars in market value. Jessica's world unraveled just as spectacularly. The FBI raided her apartment in Schaumburg, seizing her computer, her financial records, and any other evidence that might link her to the embezzlement scheme. She was arrested at her workplace, the dental practice where she had been employed as an office manager. The story made the front page of the Tribune. Wife of accused executive also charged in embezzlement scheme. The article painted her as a willing accomplice, a greedy opportunist who had exploited her position to enrich herself and her lover. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction as I read the article. Jessica had always prided herself on her cunning, her ability to manipulate men and situations to her advantage. But in the end, her hubris had been her downfall. She had bitten off more than she could chew. And now she was paying the price. The most difficult part of the fallout, however, was dealing with Tyler. He was blissfully unaware of the media frenzy, the federal raids, and the criminal charges. He knew that Daddy had moved out, that Mommy had won the big fight, and that we were getting a puppy. But he didn't understand the full scope of what was happening, and I struggled with the ethical dilemma of when and how to tell him the truth. I decided to have a conversation with him on Saturday morning, after he had finished his breakfast and was curled up on the couch with his favorite dinosaur toy. Tyler, I said, sitting down beside him, there's something I need to talk to you about. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and innocent. Is it about the puppy? It's partly about the puppy, I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. But it's also about Daddy. His expression sobered. Is Daddy in trouble? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Yes, baby. Daddy is in trouble. He did some things that weren't honest. He broke the law. And now he has to answer for what he did. Tyler's lower lip began to tremble. Is he going to jail? I don't know. Sweetie, I said, my heart breaking. I hope not. I hope he gets the help he needs. But that's up to the courts to decide. But I love Daddy, he said, his voice small. I know you do, I said, pulling him into my lap. And Daddy loves you. But loving someone doesn't mean you let them get away with hurting other people. It doesn't mean you ignore the bad things they do. It means you hold them accountable and help them become better people. He was quiet for a long time, his small body tense in my arms. Then he said, will we still be able to see him? The court has ordered that you can have supervised visitation with Daddy. I explained. That means you'll see him. But there will be someone there to make sure you're safe. And I'll be there too. Okay? I'm not going anywhere. He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. I don't want Daddy to go to jail. Mommy, I don't want him to be a bad man. He's not a bad man. Tyler, I said, my voice thick with emotion. He's just a man who made some bad choices. And we're all capable of making bad choices sometimes. The important thing is that we learn from them and try to do better next time. He didn't say anything else, but he snuggled closer to me, his small hand clutching my shirt. I held him, rocking him back and forth, and let him cry. I let him mourn the loss of the father he thought he knew, the father who had promised to be there for him forever. And I let myself cry too, for the marriage that had died, for the trust that had been shattered, for the innocence that could never be regained. The following week was a blur of legal proceedings and logistical challenges. Susan and I met with a team of federal prosecutors to discuss the evidence and coordinate our efforts. They were impressed with the depth and breadth of our investigation, and they expressed a willingness to work with us to build a strong case against Mark and Jessica. The evidence you've gathered is damning. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Ross said, his eyes scanning the file I had provided. Wire transfers, shell companies, surveillance footage, incriminating emails. It's a prosecutor's dream. We have more than enough to charge them with conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. With the right plea deal, we might be able to avoid a trial altogether. I want them to plead guilty, I said, my voice cold. I want them to admit what they did. I want them to take responsibility for their actions. I don't want them to be able to spin this, to play the victim, to make themselves out to be the good guys. Understood, Ross said, making a note on his legal pad. We'll push for a plea deal that includes a full confession and maximum restitution. If they refuse, we'll take them to trial and let the chips fall where they may. We also began the process of dividing the marital assets. A task that was complicated by the fact that Mark had hidden so much of his wealth. Susan and I worked with a team of forensic accountants to track down the missing money, following the paper trail from the shell companies to the offshore accounts. It was a painstaking process, but we were making progress. The house on Maplewood Drive, which had been the centerpiece of our life together, was the first asset to be sold. The market was strong, and we received multiple offers within days of listing it. I accepted the highest bid, a cash offer from a young couple with a newborn baby. They were thrilled to be moving into such a beautiful home, and I was relieved to be leaving it behind. The sale of the house was a symbolic victory, a tangible representation of the new life I was building. I used the proceeds to purchase a modest condo in a quiet neighborhood, close to Tyler's school and my new job. It wasn't the sprawling colonial I had shared with Mark, but it was mine. It was a fresh start, a blank slate, a place where Tyler and I could heal and grow. My new job was another source of pride and stability. I had accepted a position as a financial analyst at a local nonprofit organization, a job that allowed me to use my skills and experience while making a positive impact on my community. The salary was modest, but it was enough to cover our expenses and provide for Tyler's future. Tyler adjusted to our new life with remarkable resilience. He threw himself into his studies, earning straight A's on his report card. He joined the school soccer team, discovering a talent for the sport that surprised us all. And he embraced his role as big brother to our new puppy, a rambunctious golden retriever named Charlie, who quickly became his constant companion. Despite the outward appearance of normalcy, however, the scars of the past ran deep. I struggled with nightmares and anxiety attacks, triggered by seemingly innocuous events. The sound of a slamming door could send me into a panic. The smell of Mark's cologne could bring me to tears. I sought therapy to help me cope with the trauma. And slowly, gradually, I began to heal. Mark's deterioration was even more pronounced. He was fired from Sterling Financial, his reputation in tatters. He was unable to find work in his field, and his mounting legal fees consumed what little savings he had left. He moved into a cheap apartment in a rough neighborhood, his once polished appearance replaced by a scruffy beard and a perpetual scowl. Jessica fared even worse. She was convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. She appealed the verdict, but the appeal was denied. She was shipped off to a minimum security facility in Indiana, where she would serve her time among other white-collar criminals. Their relationship, which had begun with such promise and passion, dissolved in the face of adversity. Mark blamed Jessica for his downfall, accusing her of dragging him into her schemes and manipulating him at every turn. Jessica blamed Mark for abandoning her, for refusing to take responsibility for his actions and sacrificing her to save himself. They fought constantly, their mutual recriminations echoing through the thin walls of their apartment. I heard about their downward spiral through Claire, who kept tabs on them for me. She fed me tidbits of gossip like a cat batting around a mouse. Mark had been arrested for public intoxication. Jessica had been caught smuggling contraband into the prison. They were both sinking fast, consumed by their own greed and deceit. One rainy afternoon, several months after the final hearing, I received a letter from Mark. It arrived in a plain white envelope, postmarked from the county jail. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know what he had to say, but I knew I had to. I owed it to myself. I owed it to Tyler. I slit the envelope with a knife and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. His handwriting was shaky and uneven, the ink smudged in places. Amelia, I know you won't read this, but I have to try. I need you to understand. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to hurt Tyler. I got caught up in something I couldn't control. Jessica manipulated me. She used me. She promised me the world, and I believed her. I was weak. I was stupid. I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve to see Tyler. But please, please don't let my mistakes destroy him. He's a good kid. He deserves a father who loves him, who cares about him, who's there for him. I miss you, Amelia. I miss the way you laughed, the way you smelled, The way you felt in my arms. I miss our life. Our perfect life. I know I threw it all away. I know I can't get it back. But I had to try. I had to say goodbye. Take care of yourself. Amelia. Take care of Tyler. And if you ever find it in your heart to forgive me, I'll be waiting. Love. Mark. I read the letter twice. Then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of my nightstand. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything except a profound sense of relief. The apology. The remorse. The longing. It was all too little. Too late. It was the last gasp of a dying man, grasping at straws in a desperate attempt to salvage his pride. I closed the drawer and went to check on Tyler. He was in his room, building a Lego castle with Charlie at his feet. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up with a smile. Mum, look, it's a castle. It's for you and me and Charlie, I smiled back, my heart swelling with love. It's amazing. Baby, what's it for? It's for our new life, he said, his eyes shining. The one where we're happy, where we're safe, where we have everything we need. I sat down beside him, my heart aching with a mixture of love and sorrow. It's a beautiful life, Tyler. And it's all ours. He beamed, his small hand reaching for mine. Can we live here forever? Mom, can we, forever? I promised, squeezing his hand. We'll live here forever and ever and ever. And as I sat there, holding my son's hand and watching him build his castle, I knew that I had finally found my peace. The war was over. The battle was won. And I was free. The condo on Ayrsteer Street was quiet at 6:00 a.m. The way it always was when the city outside was still stretching and yawning. The blinds were cracked open just enough to let in a slice of Lake Michigan light. And the air carried that sharp, metallic tang of early winter. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee in front of me, the steam curling up into the stillness. Tyler was still asleep in the room down the hall, his door closed, the sound of his breathing steady and soft. Charlie, our golden retriever, lay at my feet, his tail thumping once against the floor every time a car passed by outside. The final hearing had been 3 months earlier, but the echoes of it still rang in my head. The courtroom had been packed that day, not with reporters this time, but with federal agents, forensic accountants, and a representative from the Department of Justice. Mark and Jessica had both pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The plea deal had been ironclad, the result of the mountain of evidence Susan and I had assembled. The judge's sentence was swift. Mark would serve 8 years in federal prison. Jessica 5. The terms of the divorce were finalized the same day. The division of assets reconfigured in a way that reflected the true scale of what Mark had hidden. I had won. But as I sat there, watching the light change on the wall, I realized something that surprised me. Winning wasn't what I thought it would be. I had imagined a moment of triumph, a release of pressure, a sense of absolute closure. I had expected to feel vindicated, to look at Mark across a courtroom and know, without a doubt, that justice had been served. Instead, the dominant feeling was relief, a quiet, bone-deep relief that the war was over, that the constant strategizing and second-guessing and fear of exposure were behind me. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness sharp on my tongue, and let myself think about the path that had led me here. The first step had been the simplest. In a way, it was the moment I stopped fighting. When Mark laid out his terms, the house, the car, the boat, the investment accounts, everything except Tyler, I had agreed. I had signed the papers, packed the boxes, and let him believe he had won. It was a performance, a calculated surrender, and it had given me the one thing I needed most, time. Time to gather evidence, to work with Susan, to let the net close around him. The second step had been the hardest. It was the moment I had to confront the full scope of his betrayal. The affair with Jessica had been bad enough, but the financial crimes, the collusion with a known criminal, the systematic erosion of our shared life, that was something else entirely. I had to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man who had been willing to risk everything, including his freedom, for a payout. It had been a painful reckoning, but it had also been liberating. I was no longer bound by the illusion of who he was. I was free to see him for what he really was. The third step had been the most dangerous. It was the moment I had to decide how far I was willing to go. I could have stopped at the divorce settlement, taken the house and the car and the visitation rights, and let the rest of it slide. But I knew that if I did, he would do it again. To someone else. To another woman. To another family. I knew that if I let him walk away with a slap on the wrist, I would be complicit in his next scheme. So I had pushed forward, gathering evidence, working with the authorities, risking everything to make sure he was held accountable. And now, here I was. The condo was mine. The car was mine. The bank accounts were mine. Tyler was mine. I had a job I loved, a small but growing network of friends, and a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. I was rebuilding, piece by piece, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The sound of the front door opening jolted me from my thoughts. I turned to see Susan stride in, her hair windblown, a manila folder tucked under her arm. She dropped her keys on the counter and poured herself a cup of coffee, then sat down across from me. "You're up early," she said, her eyes scanning my face. "Couldn't sleep," I said, shrugging. "Too much caffeine yesterday." She nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She had been my rock through the entire ordeal, the one person who had never wavered, never doubted, never let me give up. I owed her more than I could ever repay. "I have the final report from the forensic accountants," she said, tapping the folder. "It's all there. Every dollar, every shell company, every offshore account. The total amount Mark hid from you is $2.3 million. That's what you're entitled to, plus interest and penalties. The DOJ is already moving to seize the assets. It's over. Amelia. It's really over." I stared at the folder, the weight of the number sinking in. $2.3 million. It was a staggering sum, more than I had ever imagined. It was the cost of my silence, the price of my complicity, the measure of his greed. "I don't want it," I said, my voice quiet. Susan blinked. "What?" "I don't want the money," I repeated, meeting her gaze. "I want the house, the car, the condo, the retirement accounts. I want what's fair. But the rest of it, I don't want it. I don't want to profit from his crimes. I don't want to benefit from his downfall. I just want to move on." Susan was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," I said, my heart steady. "I've thought about it a lot. I've imagined what it would be like to have that kind of money. To be able to buy anything I want. To never have to worry about bills or tuition or anything else. And you know what? It's not appealing. It's not who I am. It's not who I want to be. I'd rather have a small, happy life than a big, empty one." Susan smiled. A slow, warm curve of her lips. "You're a better person than I am, Amelia. I would have taken the money and run. You're a better lawyer than I am," I countered, returning her smile. "That's why you're the one with the office and the staff and the corner office with the view. I'm just the client who got lucky." We sat there for a while, sipping our coffee and watching the light change. The city was waking up. The sounds of traffic and construction filtering through the window. It was a normal morning. A quiet morning. A morning that felt like a gift. "I have something else for you," Susan said, reaching into her briefcase. She pulled out a small, wrapped package and set it on the table between us. I looked at it. My brow furrowed. "What is it?" "Open it," she said, her eyes twinkling. I unwrapped the paper carefully, revealing a small, silver keychain. It was a simple thing. A rectangle of polished metal engraved with the words resilience and grace. I stared at it, my throat tightening. "I had it made for you," Susan said, her voice soft. "To commemorate the end of the case. To remind you of what you've been through. And what you've overcome. You're one of the strongest, bravest people I've ever met. Amelia. Don't ever forget that." I picked up the keychain, the metal cool against my palm. I had no words, so I just nodded, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. Susan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You did it. Amelia. You really did it. We did it. I corrected, my voice barely above a whisper. We. She smiled. Understanding. We. The sound of paws on the floor broke the silence. Charlie stood up, stretched, and padded over to me, his tail wagging. I scratched him behind the ears, and he leaned into my hand, his eyes closing in contentment. He's a good dog, Susan said, watching us. He's the best. I agreed, my heart swelling with love. He's been my rock through all of this. You all have, Susan said, standing up. Tyler. You. Charlie. You're a team. And teams win. She gathered her things and headed for the door, but paused before leaving. I'll be in touch about the final settlement. But for now, enjoy the quiet. Enjoy the win. I watched her go, then turned back to the window. The sun was fully up now, casting a warm glow over the city. I thought about everything we had been through, everything we had endured. The betrayal, the lies, the fear, the uncertainty, but also the resilience, the courage, the solidarity, the moments of laughter and love and hope. I thought about Tyler, building his Lego castles and dreaming of a future where he was happy and safe. I thought about Charlie, curling up at my feet and making me feel less alone. I thought about Susan, standing by my side when I needed her most. And I thought about Mark. He was serving his sentence in a federal prison in Wisconsin. A bleak, gray building surrounded by razor wire and guards. He had tried to reach out once, shortly after sentencing, sending a letter that was equal parts apology and justification. I hadn't responded. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choices. He had faced the consequences. And now, he was paying the price. But as I sat there, watching the city wake up, I realized something else. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate had been a luxury, a distraction, a weight I couldn't afford to carry. It had fueled my determination, yes, but it had also poisoned my soul. Letting it go was not an act of forgiveness. It was an act of survival. I was done with hate, done with bitterness, done with the endless cycle of blame and retaliation. I was ready to embrace the future. Whatever it held. The door to Tyler's room creaked open, and he emerged, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking up in every direction. He was wearing his favorite superhero pajamas, the fabric soft and faded from years of washing. Morning, Mom, he mumbled, padding over to me and climbing into my lap. Is it time for pancakes? It's always time for pancakes, I said, wrapping my arms around him. He smelled like toothpaste and sleep and childhood, and I breathed him in like he was a lifeline. Charlie hopped up beside us, his tail thumping against the chair. We sat there for a while, the three of us, in the quiet of the morning, in the safety of our home. This was the real win. Not the money, not the house, not the legal victory. This, the quiet, the love, the freedom. I had fought for justice, and I had found it, but more importantly, I had found peace. And that was worth more than anything else.